Hey, hi booktube, Erin here. Hope you're doing okay. Today I've got another random reading update for you. I think it's been nearly 2 weeks since the last one. I haven't been terribly active, but I've been doing a fair bit of reading. And two of the four books that I've finished since the last update are pretty chunky, so I'm gonna do my best not to ramble too much. Um, but I also want to sort of do them justice. But I'll work up to it and start off with the two shorter books, and then we'll see how it goes. So the first one I got here is a collection of poems. It's the collected poems of Georg Trakl called "Surrender Tonight," and he was I believe, a Czech poet, but I think writing in German. Um, but it's translated by Will Stone, and a lot of it was um, very samey, but very it's quite hard to find the right word. It's quite disquieting, really. A lot of what felt to me kind of twilight, autumnal kind of scenes, a lot of peasant life, and a lot of just people walking through fairly barren landscapes, and there might be um, somebody sort of like a labourer in a field somewhere in the distance, and there's sort of strange, slightly more surreal, or sort of supernatural poems about. There's one about like the angel of death visiting a small village, and just sort of flying out of the window with someone's soul. That one kind of stuck in my head. So yeah, very disquieting poems. Some of them are celebrations of life and sort of everyday things, and sort of recollections of sort of escapades with friends. But yeah, it's very hard because a lot of them, it's a lot of the same words turning up again, a lot of the same kind of mood and the same kinds of images. So it's kind of hard to differentiate certain poems. But as a whole, I still really quite enjoyed it, and I even though it is a weird, uh, sort of unsettling feeling that it leaves you with, I did still quite like it. So it's a good one, I think, to throw in if you're going traveling or something and you want some poems to read, to just throw in a backpack and open randomly. It's I think a good one for that kind of thing. Another one I finished recently. This was one I was rereading for Remember December, which is an event I'm co-hosting this year with lots of lovely people. Um, and there are prompts for it just to help if you need help thinking of what to read, or reread. And there's one for rereading a book that you have read before to see how you really feel about it. And for that prompt, I've just finished rereading The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath, and I really liked this the first time round, and it turns out I like it even more, um, with a second reading. Um, it was interesting having read Heather Clark's Red Comet, which is a wonderful, in-depth, sprawling biography of Sylvia Plath. After reading that, and it goes into the events that sort of inspire the book, it was quite interesting because I could guess what was going to happen next, but I couldn't tell whether that memory was sparked from my last reading of the book about 7 years ago, or from reading about the events that inspired the book in Red Comet. So that was quite interesting. And also just sort of technically, um, at the beginning, I'm going to see if I can find it. There's a bit where she's talking about this all these sort of freebies that she's been given, all this makeup and this sort of sunglasses that come in a sequin case that has a little, I think it's something like a starfish. Yeah, here we go. So I still have the makeup kit they gave me, fitted out for a person with brown eyes and brown hair. an oblong of brown mascara with a tiny brush, and a round basin of blue eyeshadow, just big enough to dab on the tip of your finger, just big, yeah, just big enough to dab the tip of your finger in, and 3 lipsticks ranging from red to pink, all cased in the same little gilt box with a mirror on one side. I also have a white plastic sunglasses case with coloured shells and sequins and a green plastic starfish sewed onto it. I realised we kept piling up these presents because it was as good as free advertising for the firms involved, but I couldn't be cynical. I got such a kick out of all those free gifts showering onto us. For a long time afterwards, I hid them away, but later, when I was all right again, I brought them out, and I still have them around the house. I use the lipsticks now and then, and last week I cut the plastic starfish off the sunglasses case for the baby to play with. And it's really that second paragraph, the second half of that I found quite interesting, because she says that she still has them now, and she says she hid them away for a long time, but then when I was all right again, I brought them out. And so we know from that even though she hasn't really told us yet, that there's going to be some point in this character's life a time where they're not all right, but that they're going to be all right again. She mentions a baby, so there's a life afterwards. So we're already getting an idea of what's going to happen, that there's going to be some kind of downward slope, but there's hope eventually, which I thought was really interesting and kind of comforting for a book that goes to some very dark places. To know you've got that at the beginning, and your main character to say that it's gonna get bad, but it's okay because I'm still here, was I think it's quite good because it just keeps it from feeling like it's too much. But I really loved it. I think a great main character, Esther Greenwood. One of my favourite bits is towards the end when she's in an institution and a nurse is coming to give her her injections, and she finds that she's wearing her pajamas underneath her dress just to save from having to get changed, and just things like that. I just really love those kinds of details. So that's the 2 short books out of the way. 2 big books. 2 books I loved, and this first one is one that I was really excited to read, and that's Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy. I really enjoyed War and Peace when I read that last year, and so I sort of penciled this in for late what months now for late November and December this year, because Classics and Company were reading it, so it's a event reading group thing that Micah Cummins and Anne Novella have been doing this year, and this was their book to close off 2023. And I was really excited to read it, and for me it definitely it reached and surpassed my expectations. I had worries because I've seen the film, so I had an idea of the general plot of the story, and then you see there's like a big nearly 1,000-page book, and you're just sort of like, how does that story that I've seen in this film fit into this brick? So that was one of my concerns. Compared to War and Peace, it is a much more concise book, which I did like. I'm not sure which book I prefer ultimately, but I appreciated that Anna Karenina feels like it's, even though there are multiple storylines, it feels to me more like it's moving in one direction. But to try and make some kind of coherent sense when talking about this book, I've got 2 questions. So one is, what did I love about this book? And then my other question is, which do I think is actually better to start with for anyone who hasn't read either War and Peace or Anna Karenina, which would be better to start with? So with the first question, what I loved about this book is much the same of what I loved in War and Peace, which is the characters, and not just the characters as characters that you might find lovable or relatable, but the characters as people, I suppose. I think they are, characters in Tolstoy's writing are some of the most sort of realistic that you might come across. Um, their outlooks on life are challenged a fair bit as the whole book goes on, um, and yeah, they change both on the outside and on the inside as the book goes on. But I think the thing I love even more is the way you see them changes as the book goes on, and so it's kind of like meeting a real person. I think it's as close to meeting a real person as you can get, and I felt that really strongly here. Because it's interesting, like with Anna, she, I didn't feel like I was really getting to know her right at the beginning when we first meet her, and I was wondering whether that's because we're seeing her kind of as she's presenting herself to society, um, and that all you're really getting is the outside. You're getting wit and charm, and she's beautiful, and charismatic, but you don't feel like you're quite meeting the person. And then, at least for me, gradually, as the book goes on, you get deeper and deeper, um, and so you're coming to understand her in a deeper way. Um, but also as the book goes on and the plot goes on, her head is, she's under much more pressure, and she's sort of going back and forth on all sorts of things, and so excuse me, you're getting to know her better, but also she's changing, and her, she's kind of all over the place. So yeah, that's really quite fascinating, and definitely there's a scene, or like a number of chapters towards the end, where it's just Anna, and for the whole thing, you're basically just in her head for the whole thing, and it's probably the best bit of the whole book. It's just sort of electrifying writing, and yeah, really loved it. So that's what I kind of like. I also like, and again, it's something from War and Peace, is the fact that Tolstoy really sees the value of individuals. So in War and Peace, it's very much thinking about war and nations, and he's trying to do away with the kind of great man of history kind of thing, and instead, reminding us that wars are fought by history, and the great events that shape history are ultimately shaped by individuals that make up armies that belong to countries, but ultimately it's individuals doing this. And I think there's a progression from that to Anna Karenina, but instead of thinking about warfare, instead he's thinking about the family, and about politics, and about social change and stuff like that. So there's a bit of they kind of flow into each other, the family stuff and the political stuff, and so it's more how, I suppose, sort of changes in family life are also affected by the individual, but and changes in politics are changed by individuals, but also then it kind of turns it the other way, and it's how maybe changes in political discourse or certain ideas in politics turning up affect an individual, and how something happening in just one family might affect any number of individuals in different ways. So I don't know if that makes any sense at all, or whether I'm doing the book justice, but there are a couple of things that I really quite liked about it. Then where to go with this then? whether you should start with this or start with War and Peace if you haven't read either of them before. I think this is a much more conventional novel, and so I think it might be easier in that sense. But as I was kind of trying to say earlier, there's a kind of, I feel, a progression from War and Peace into Anna Karenina. I'm not sure if that's sort of stuff that other people would really be interested in. But both of them are actually much more approachable than you might think. And even though this is about, sort of family life and sort of trouble with loved ones, it's just as electrifying and powerful as the battle scenes and all the drama of War and Peace. So it's certainly not a boring book. So I'll leave it there. It's really quite hard to do it any kind of justice, really. If I can think of a coherent way to convey more of what I think about it, I might try and do that in a separate video. But I'll leave it there for Anna Karenina today. And then the last one is The House of Government by Yuri Slezkine. And ultimately, this is just a history of the Russian Revolution and about the Soviet experiment. It's doing that. He set a kind of geographical restriction on himself, which is the House of Government, which was built right opposite the Kremlin, just over the river from the Kremlin. And it was built in the 20s or 30s, I think in the sort of late 20s, as a place for government officials and their families to live. So then we obviously need the big backstory of the lead up to the Russian Revolution and the Civil War and Lenin and war communism, and then the sort of new order of things and the rebuilding of a society, very much mirrored in the building of this house. That the House of Government is kind of the house of communism in Russia, and it's. I'm trying to think whether it's a good a good first book for someone on the Russian Revolution, since it's the only book on the Russian Revolution I've read really sort of dedicated to it. I probably can't really say, but in one sense, because there are loads and loads of characters in here, and it is almost like a big sweeping novel. There are so many characters moving in and out. In a way, it doesn't really matter. You're not. He's not taking you deep into the decision making of Lenin or Stalin or whoever. Instead, he is showing you how these decisions and these changes over time affect real people and their families, and that kind of humanitarian approach is, I think, that's really at the heart of the book, and that's what kind of keeps you going, I think. And so you don't have to hang on to certain names. You don't have to feel like you need to remember everything or note every little detail down. And by the time you get to the end, you've been given this big sweeping picture of the whole thing, all the way up to Stalin's purges and the Second World War. And then after that whole first generation has gone, then adding things up and actually seeing, was any of this actually worth it? And so, yeah, it gives you that general idea, but does it through individual, real people's lives. So yeah, I'm not too sure, because there's a lot going on and you're given loads of information. So if you know absolutely nothing, your head might be spinning a little bit. My head was spinning every now and then, and I'd have to go back and try to remember what's going on. But then again, you don't have to get too hung up on things. So I'd say give it a go. If you'd like to. Your arms will certainly be stronger after reading it. It's a very heavy book. Um, but ultimately, um, it's an almost perfect book for me. I think I gave it 4 stars over on Goodreads, and and Will Chambers asked why I gave this 4 and not 5, which is a really, really interesting question. Um, and the initial answer is that generally on Goodreads or anything like that, when I give a book its star rating, it's it's I don't take it too seriously, really. um, um, and so it's generally just an initial reaction. Um, but it was close to 5 stars in my head. And the only reason it didn't get 5 and that initial reaction was 4, it was because there was a moment of hesitation. And I thought that was quite interesting and quite important, that I was thinking about giving it 5 stars and then hesitated. Because it does what it sets out to do really, really well. There's some great. He essentially describes the Bolsheviks as a millenarian sect. So, like a religious group. They're described as preachers. The day of the revolution is like a day of judgment almost, and then they're going to build their heaven on earth. And that goes all the way. That there's a thread of that going all the way through, and where it's all this very positive, sort of, I don't know, it's hard to explain, but when it's all gearing up to this big great day, and then later on, uh, the language of the kind of religious language is a little more sour, and it's all about scapegoats and sacrifices, um, and yeah, that's all very satisfying. There's a kind of thread of the religion of Bolshevism going all the way through the book. But I think what really made me hesitate, as great as it was that I think there is just so much detail in this book, which is part of what makes it so great. But every now and then there would be one anecdote or something where I just fail to see why I was being told this. Where if it was an important story and he really wanted to get these people's experiences through to me, then I was kind of wishing that he would paint a slightly more vivid picture of them, because sometimes it does feel like he's speeding over certain stories and then pausing on others, and sometimes stories you wish he'd spend more time with, and others you'd hope he sped up a bit. And so it's it's difficult, and part of my reaction might be just that I'm unfamiliar to a lot of this stuff, um, and so it might be that once I'm more familiar and I come back to it and I can just bask in it, it might feel like the best thing in the world. So that's kind of why I gave it 4 and not 5. But again, I don't really think too much about this. Another interesting thing I thought of, towards the end in his conclusion, he kind of says something that struck me, because essentially he says that by the second generation after the revolution, so those sort of coming of age during or just after the Second World War, he's basically saying that Bolshevism had failed, or it had failed to pass on its belief and its fervor to the next generation, and so the Soviet Union carried on sort of well into the second half of the 20th century, but that fervor, that almost religious feeling that the first generation had, wasn't handed down, and part of that was because, Slezkine reckons that part of the reason why is because they were, letting their kids read um, Dickens and Tolstoy and Cervantes, and none of these sort of second generation Soviets really actually read Marx or Engels or even Lenin, or maybe occasionally something by Stalin. Um, but so they were more humanitarian at heart um, than they were communist, really. And so they kind of shot themselves in the foot in a way. And you just had a whole generation of people carrying on what their parents had give them, but with no real enthusiasm. Or at least that's the picture that he paints of them. Since their parent, they've been through the Second World War. Maybe their parents were killed or imprisoned in Stalin's purges. And so yeah, it's not as optimistic as things were feeling early on. And a very jarring thing that he says on this note is he says he says that if they wanted Bolshevism to work, then they should have been more totalitarian. That they weren't totalitarian enough. They made too many compromises, which is not to say that he wanted them to do that, and that you know, but that ultimately they failed, and they didn't really plant the seeds that they wanted to. So yeah, that was really, really fascinating. It's a very bittersweet ending. You kind of have just a feeling of a whole generation coming of age, where they probably feel twice as old as they really are. They've probably lost multiple family members, and friends, and they just seem very alone in the world, and they're stuck in their own memories. So it's beautiful and sad as well. So that's the House of Government. And yeah, it was really good. I won't be rushing to reread it, but it's one I'll be keeping on the shelves, and maybe when I'm more familiar with the Russian Revolution and with the Soviet Union, I might go back to it, but probably a little while. And that's everything that I've finished since my last update. It's been a really lovely reading month at the moment. I'm reading some poems by Pierre Reverdy, rereading them for Remember December. I'm also about halfway through Purgatory with Dante and Virgil. So that's been really, really fun. I found out a fun fact. If you're still watching the bonus, you get a bonus fun fact. The word human kind of shares a root in Latin with humility, and that sort of hue, or the kind of homo, as well. It kind of comes from the same root. I think means earth, and so a human is someone of the earth, and to get a bit biblical, is from dust, and then return to the dust, and to be humble, humility is to, I suppose, be brought down to the dust, or to remember that you're dust. And in, I can't remember which terrace it is, but it's the terrace of the proud, and the punishment that they have to purge themselves on their way to paradise is they have a boulder on their back, and they're forced to look down at the ground, and so their humility is brought about by looking at what they're made out of. So that was an interesting sort of etymological pun on Dante's part. And then the other thing I'm reading at the moment is The Broken Road by Patrick Leigh Fermor. This is a end of the year sort of present to myself, since I've been enjoying him so much. So maybe these will see me through to the end of the year, or maybe I'll find some other things to read. But that's where I'm at the moment. Let me know what you think. I hope that my what I had to say about those books made some semblance of sense. I tried recording them earlier and didn't go too well, so I'm slightly happier with the results today. So let me know what you think. If you have any any strong words to say or anything at all, that's fine. But thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon. Bye.